Paul Walker did not flinch when Dwayne Johnson leaned across that crowded restaurant table and told him he would be forgotten the day the cameras stopped rolling. But when Paul finally lifted his eyes, leaned forward, and whispered a single sentence into Dwayne's ear, the entire table went silent, the laughter died, and the man known as The Rock could not move for almost a full minute. The restaurant was one of those places that did not need a sign on the door. Tucked away on a quiet side street in Los Angeles, it was the kind of spot where studio executives, A-list actors, and silent power players gathered without the noise of cameras or fans. The lighting was low, the conversations were softer than usual, and the waiters moved like ghosts. On that particular Thursday evening in late spring of 2011, the back corner table was reserved for the cast and crew of the fifth Fast and Furious film, a movie that had just finished a brutal stretch of reshoots in Puerto Rico. Paul Walker arrived first, as he almost always did. He wore a faded blue Henley, dark jeans, and a pair of weathered work boots that did not match the marble floor or the imported chandeliers above his head. He sat down quietly, ordered a glass of water with lemon, and waited. Dwayne Johnson arrived 20 minutes late, surrounded by 2 assistants and a publicist. He was loud, charismatic, magnetic in the way only he knew how to be. He shook hands with the manager, posed for a quick photograph with a kitchen worker who recognized him, and finally made his way to the table. Vin Diesel was already there by then, along with Tyrese Gibson, Michelle Rodriguez, and Jordana Brewster. Jason Statham had not yet been cast in the franchise, so the table was a tight inner circle of the original crew plus the new heavyweight that had been brought in to give the film a fresh edge. Dwayne sat down across from Paul and immediately took control of the conversation. He talked about his upcoming projects, his deal with Universal, the new lines of merchandise his team was preparing. Paul listened politely, smiled at the right moments, and said almost nothing. About 40 minutes into the dinner, after several rounds of drinks had loosened the room, Dwayne turned his attention directly to Paul. The smile on his face was friendly on the surface, but there was something sharper underneath. He leaned across the table, lowered his voice just enough to make sure the others could still hear, and said, "You know what your problem is, brother? You are a moment in time. The day the cameras stop rolling on this franchise, you will be forgotten. Nobody is going to remember the pretty boy. They are going to remember the ones who built something bigger than the screen." The table went quiet for a beat. Tyrese let out a nervous laugh that died in his throat. Michelle stared at her plate. Vin shifted in his seat but did not interrupt. Paul did not respond at first. He picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back down on the table. He glanced at the candle in the middle of the table, watching the small flame dance for a few seconds. Then he looked up at Dwayne. His eyes were calm, almost gentle, but there was a steadiness in them that made the air in the room change. He did not raise his voice. He did not get angry. He simply leaned forward slightly, rested his forearms on the table, and held Dwayne's gaze. Everyone at the table felt it. The shift. The pause. The kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. Dwayne's smile faltered just slightly. He had expected a laugh, a deflection, maybe even a sharp comeback he could swat away with his charm. He had not expected this. Paul leaned a little closer, just enough so that only Dwayne could hear what came next, and whispered a single sentence into his ear. Nobody else at the table heard the exact words. They only saw the effect. Dwayne Johnson, the man who had stood toe-to-toe with the biggest action stars in the world, the man who had built an empire out of muscle and confidence, sat back in his chair and did not move. He did not blink. He did not breathe. His hands rested on the white tablecloth, motionless, while the candle in front of him flickered against his face. For almost a full minute, nobody spoke. The waiter, who had been approaching with a tray of fresh drinks, stopped halfway to the table and quietly turned around. Tyrese later said it felt like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Michelle said she had never seen Dwayne look so still. Vin Diesel said he watched Paul lean back into his seat, pick up his menu, and calmly start reading the dessert options as if nothing had happened. Dwayne finally cleared his throat, took a long drink of water, and excused himself from the table. He walked to the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen, and stood alone outside near the alley for almost 10 minutes before returning. When he came back, the conversation had shifted to something else entirely. Paul was laughing softly at a joke Tyrese had just made. The dinner continued, but something between the two men had changed forever. The story of that whispered sentence stayed inside that restaurant for years. None of the cast members ever publicly repeated what they thought they had seen. Dwayne never spoke about it in any interview, in any podcast, in any documentary. Paul Walker, with the kind of quiet grace that defined him, never brought it up either. But people who were close to the production noticed something afterwards. Dwayne was different around Paul on set. The arrogance was gone. The performative dominance disappeared. When the cameras rolled, Dwayne treated Paul not as a co-star to overshadow, but as an equal to share the frame with. Some of the crew members later said it was as if Paul had reached into a part of Dwayne that nobody else had ever touched, and reminded him of something he had buried a long time ago. What Paul actually whispered that night is something we may never know with absolute certainty. There are theories. Some say it was a memory from years earlier, a moment the two had shared off camera that Dwayne had forgotten but Paul had not. Some say it was a single line about Dwayne's daughter Simone, something gentle but pointed about the kind of man she would one day need her father to be. Others believe it was a quote from a letter Dwayne had once written and never sent, a letter that somehow Paul had read or heard about. The most common version, the one that crew members have shared in private over the years, is that Paul looked at Dwayne and said quietly, "I do not need to be remembered. I just need to mean something to the people I love. The day you stop chasing the cameras, you will understand the difference." Whether those were the exact words or not, the meaning landed. Dwayne Johnson, in the years that followed, slowly began to talk differently in interviews. He started speaking about legacy not as fame, but as family. He spoke about his daughters more openly. He spoke about the people who had been there when nobody was watching. After Paul Walker passed away in November of 2013, Dwayne posted a tribute that surprised many of his fans. It was not loud. It was not branded. It was a quiet, simple message about a man who had taught him something important without ever raising his voice. Years later, in a private moment that was never meant for the public, Dwayne was asked by a close friend what Paul had whispered to him that night in the restaurant. He paused for a long time before answering. According to that friend, Dwayne smiled gently, looked down at the floor, and said, "He told me the truth." And the truth was the one thing I had not heard in a very long time. Paul Walker passed away on November 30th, 2013, in a tragic car accident in Santa Clarita, California. He was only 40 years old. The whispered sentence in that restaurant remained a private moment between two men who shared something far deeper than the world ever fully understood. After Paul's passing, Dwayne Johnson posted a tribute that surprised many of his longtime fans. It was not loud. It was not branded. It was a quiet message about a man who had once taught him something important without ever raising his voice in anger. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment to hit the like button below and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another untold moment from the lives of the people we only thought we knew. Drop a comment below and tell us exactly what you would have whispered if you had been the one sitting in Paul Walker's seat across that candlelit table. Share this video tonight with someone who is being underestimated right now, because sometimes the kindest thing we can do is remind another human being that they are not just a passing moment in the spotlight.